hello. So, I'm making this video because I have made a couple of errors, so I'm going to talk about them and then discuss the thought process that went behind them. So, here's the plot. Inspiring sophistry. He recruited some people to help him in his crusade against me. One of them is Tim O'Neill, who I've never heard of before. He runs this website called History for Atheists. So here, I can pull that up and I can show you. It's this guy right here. And I mean, it seems like a fine website. He's been a guest on Paulogia before, but like I said, I didn't know who he was. He's the guy who's interviewing, and it's from their YouTube channel. This guy, whose name is, I don't know if it's Tony or Thony. Sorry. I'm just going to say Tony. So a clip from this was used in one of Jones's videos. Tim left a comment on one of my videos, the longer one, about this whole thing. Basically, I'm the living embodiment of Dunning-Kruger and some other things is what it said. And then apparently he also wants to give me an award. He does this dumbest atheist of the year thing every year that he gives atheists who say things that are historically incorrect. If it comes with prize money, then I'm all for it. So along with that, I get tagged on this post on Twitter that I'm pretty sure Tim wrote. And he says, the whole we have our candidate for biggest idiot of the year, so on and so on and so forth. Tony gets tagged in it. Inspiring Philosophy gets tagged in it. I think maybe a couple other people were tagged in it. I don't really know. So anyways, not proud of this, but Jones did such a phenomenal job with all of his lying and his tactics of poisoning the well for me on this that and none of this changes that part of it. But anyways, when I see this post and all these things, I just think, okay, so what? It's 3-on-1 now. You guys are on Jones's side or something. I know Jones is completely full of shit, lied about tons of stuff, and used all these disgusting tactics. So I see that online, and in short, I basically act kind of like a jackass toward both of them, though I'd say I was more returning the favor because this is going to sound childish, but I didn't start this. I'll show you more on this later, but actually the provocation against me is actually really kind of odd coming from Tim, considering the other things that I have seen from him. And it'll take a while, but I'll explain what I'm talking about. But after some of the exchanges back and forth, I start to realize, wait a minute, Tim is contradicting Inspiring Philosophy, what he said, particularly on, well, I'll tell you what, but it's basically about, did Galileo have permission to talk about heliocentrism? So after I realized that, I'm like, wait a minute. So I dropped my guard. I stopped being so just defensive, I guess. And I start looking at sources for hours. I spent a couple hours yesterday, and then this morning, literally from, well, this video is going to get published the next day, but yesterday morning, from 3 in the morning till 7 in the morning, all I was doing was reading stuff, watching videos that Tim had put up, checking out interviews and things like that, to try to figure out what's going on. So, like I said, there are for sure 2 mistakes, and I'm going to share what those are. And then there are these other contentions. I'll tell you what the counter argument to what I've said is. And for some of those contentions, I either find it to be not convincing at all, or just basically not resolved. So I would say the Galileo story, as I understand it, most of the details I first heard a really long time ago in this video. It's a pretty popular one from Alex, who was going by Cosmic Skeptic at the time. And I'll go over what parts of this are wrong after a little bit. But here's one of the things I wanted to point out. There's Paulogia right there saying, thank you, I learned a lot from this. And Tim goes on is a guest on Paulogia's channel and doesn't nominate him for any awards. I'm only saying this because this information is actually really widespread, some of the details that I got wrong. In fact, the stuff I got wrong, Jones also got wrong. It's on both sides of the aisle, and I just found it really kind of unpalatable and weird. Like, again, the vitriol, when it's known for a fact that these details that aren't correct are the popular misconception. Like, misconceptions exist, and I'm writing a book about misconceptions, and just like, I don't know, the idea of holding somebody in contempt for holding to a misconception that by definition affect a lot of us, it's odd. So if you would have asked me a couple of days ago, give the general story of the Galileo affair, this is what I would have said. The church declares heliocentrism is heretical. Galileo has a meeting with Cardinal Bellarmine, warning him of the dangers of speaking about it. And then later, there's either a letter was sent or a meeting. I hear conflicting things. But Galileo is told in one form or another in 1616 that there's this partial injunction on talking about heliocentrism. Talk about it. You can openly talk about it as maybes, but not as fact, essentially. Galileo, having convinced himself that he had good proof that the Earth orbits the sun, publishes that fictional book, The Dialogue. After publishing his book, he goes on trial. He's tried for heresy, but many people believe that the Pope was also exacting revenge on him because Galileo, at the very end of the book, a character whose name is Simplicio, Galileo has him say something that the Pope once said to Galileo, and I don't remember if it was Pope Urban the Eighth. I think it's eighth. I know it's Pope Urban, or there's actually two popes between this, so I don't remember which one exactly. At his trial, the Inquisition tells Galileo, "You were not to discuss heliocentrism on any terms," and then Galileo Uno reverse cards them. He's like, "Nuh-uh, Bellarmine told me I could." And then the Inquisition finds him guilty of heresy anyways, and he's put on house arrest for life. Okay, so this is the story now as I understand it. Simplified, we're going to go into pretty deep detail on a lot of this. Points number 1 and number 2 are the same, but what Galileo was told, either in person or in writing, was that he had a complete injunction. So I'll go to that. That'll be the first thing I bring up here. He's tried and convicted of vehement suspicion of heresy. So there was some, what does that mean? Is that actually not the same thing as heresy? Again, we'll get into that too. I was wrong about that. What Galileo actually did was deny that Bellarmine said that the injunction was complete. There was no letter. And then he's convicted and sentenced to house arrest. So the very first thing is, did Galileo have permission to talk about heliocentrism hypothetically? The answer is no. Now, I always maintained that because I read the sentence from the Inquisition, it very plainly states that you do not have permission to talk about this. Maybe I'll put up the screenshot that I'd been using for this. And I was going crazy being told over and over again by Jones that that was not the case, that he could talk about it hypothetically. But I fell for this in a different way because I was under the impression that Galileo had that letter from Bellarmine. Now, from what I've been able to gather, this is also what Tony says. I'm pretty sure this is the part.
Anybody could talk about it hypothetically,
Yeah.
but not as a theory, not as a truth.
Yep.
Our distinction between hypothesis and theory didn't exist then. It's slightly different, but I use the modern terms.
Yeah.
I've been criticized for using the modern terms, but it's the easiest way of explaining it.
Yeah.
And say, look, no, Cook. And they said, well, all it says is that you weren't censured in 1616. It has nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
And they produced the document which people said, a lot of people have said, which is the official record that he was for position that he was not allowed to hold or teach the Copernican theory.
theory. You can still hold it as a hypothesis, as a theory. You can still hold it as a hypothesis, as a working.
Anybody could talk about it hypothetically.
I don't think any of you either are reading that and hearing him not say that it was okay to talk about heliocentrism in hypothetical terms. This is very confusing for me because Tim on Twitter just absolutely lambasted me and was like, no, he had a complete injunction. But Tony's saying that's not the case and he's agreeing with it. So I have two people telling me I'm wrong, but one person disagrees with the other person, and the other person, Tim, disagrees with his past self too. This is actually just confusing. In this interview he does with this guy named Sebastian, they talk about it earlier, but no, that partial injunction was never a thing. So I'm really confused why Tim, in one interview, they're saying the whole thing about hypothetical terms, that was allowed, and then here they're not. Now, that other one was 3 years ago. This one's more recent. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Tim thought that was the case 3 years ago and today doesn't. I don't know. Every single source I looked at, and before I made my initial comments, every source I looked at said the same thing. I looked on religious websites. I looked on secular websites. That YouTube video from Alex O'Connor. Everything I looked at said that this whole thing about having permission to talk about it in hypothetical terms with Bellarmine's blessing, that was everywhere. Everywhere I looked. I even used Google AI and ChatGPT just to try to see if I could get something to tell me the opposite. But every source told me yes. Now, I did find this book about Galileo. It's free on the internet. It's just called Galileo. I can't remember the name of the author. Now, I obviously didn't read the whole book. It's 500 something pages, but I did some word searches just to go through it quick, and I didn't find anything one way or the other. And again, all the other sources I looked at were telling me the same thing. So I don't think I'm in the irrational position of being like, okay, that's how it was. But I did find here on page 218, I don't know if you guys will be able to, you can pause this and read it if you want, but this does essentially say that the injunction that was on Galileo was a total injunction. So this puts pi in everybody's faces, kind of for different reasons, I guess. But in any case, that is what the truth is. The History for Atheists guy, Tim, he showed me this website. I don't remember what it was and I didn't bookmark it, but I looked it over. And essentially at Galileo's trial, Galileo said, oh, well, I don't remember Bellarmine saying the injunction was total. So he kind of backtracks on it, I guess. Well, actually, you know what? Here, just listen to this.
The dynamic of the trial. And here's where I found that you had been led astray. And it was James Reston, who's a journalist, who wrote a biography of Galileo, who, Sebastian, you in good faith read and thought, this guy is he's a best-selling, well-regarded author. He's written lots of books on history. Why wouldn't you take it as that his account as being correct? But what he did was he flipped around.
Okay, sorry, but I have to say this. Why don't I get that treatment? Whatever.
This sequence of events in the trial. So he had, them producing the case note from 1616 saying you were instructed not to discuss this in any way, and he then has Galileo pull out a letter from Cardinal Bellarmine, the then head of the Inquisition, saying, he hasn't been condemned of anything, and he's right to keep doing his work. But it was exactly the other way around, and it was remarkable to me when I heard you present that sequence in that way. I thought, wow, where's he got that from? And then I went and did a bit of homework and found that he's this well-regarded published author, James Reston. He has clearly deliberately flipped it.
So, I don't think we need to listen to more of this, but yes, it is a popular misconception. The next thing is heresy or vehement suspicion of heresy. So I've always said that Galileo was tried and convicted for heresy. So once again, every single source I looked at said the exact same thing. Again, I saw religious websites and secular websites, and everything said that. I did know about that language of vehement suspicion before because I read it when I read Galileo's sentencing. So I see that, and this is how my thought process went. This is how I allowed myself to lead myself astray. Every source is saying heresy. What is vehemently suspicious of heresy? So I look up the definition of vehement and used language models to try to tell me what it would mean to combine vehement suspicion of heresy, like in plain English. Full disclosure, I was looking for how this phrase could translate to guilty of heresy, because again, every source I ever saw said that that's what happened. So vehement means forceful, passionate, or like intense, I guess. So if it's vehemently suspicious, are we saying like super duper extra crispy suspicious of heresy? So I'm asking myself, why are we using all these qualifying terms for suspicion? Or, well, attaching them to the word suspicious. Well, this is 400 years ago. Like, read Shakespeare. Everything is embellished, especially important things. And another crucial detail is his conviction wasn't written in English. It was written in, I don't know if it was Italian or Latin, I guess. I don't know if like for formal things they wrote in Latin or something. But anyways, things don't translate perfectly. Now, what I'm also thinking is, well, because this is supposed to be like a trial, like a court of law, what I'm thinking is the standard is supposed to be beyond reasonable doubt if you want to claim that somebody did something. So in my mind, taking all that stuff together, vehement suspicion was how a translation of guilty beyond reasonable doubt sounded to me. That was my thought process. I'm telling you it's wrong, but I didn't find anything illogical about that thought process. So what I've been told is that it really does basically just mean very suspicious, and it's a lesser sentence, but I actually still don't fully understand it. O'Neill and this other guy talk about it earlier in this video, but all they say is, vehemently suspicious of heresy. Well, that sounds a lot like heresy, doesn't it? But it's not. And then they just don't go into it in any more detail. It's also talked about in this Tony Christie video, and from what I heard him say, I don't know if this is the actual explanation, because again, they didn't really actually spend very much time on it. The vehemently suspicious of heresy was the sentence he was given for disobeying the order for writing about heliocentrism in a factual matter. So I'm happy to say that I wasn't correct when I said heresy. I'm still like really, I don't understand this because I don't understand how you can convict somebody of very much probably doing something. That doesn't make sense. I mean, but at the same time, Inquisitions, I mean, they're not known for being bastions of justice. I would also guess this is probably one of the biggest reasons why Galileo was put on house arrest instead of like, I don't know, executed. This whole thing about vehemently suspicious of heresy, though, keep this in your back pocket because it becomes one of the most relevant things toward the end here. Next contention is what they've really been going after me for is, did Galileo have sufficient evidence? So this is a pretty long part of the two videos I put up. I'm not going to rehash all of it. The gist has been what I've been told, and pretty much just by Jones, was that heliocentrism couldn't be accepted until we had Newton's equations and elliptical orbits, which is not the case. You don't need to know the value of pi to know that a square isn't a circle. And you don't need the inverse square law to demonstrate that a heliocentric model is better than a geocentric or a hybrid model. And you can basically disprove the geocentric model sort of like by contradiction. That's not the same thing as saying proving that the Galilean model is correct, because it does have flaws, but you can disprove the other model. So the specific gripe that I got was, I said the phases of Venus preclude a geocentric model, and they absolutely do. This just is not debatable. The Earth would have to be between Venus and the Sun for Venus to be fully illuminated with its phases, and that is precisely the opposite of what happens. So there's no hope for that. Now, I am specifically talking about a geocentric model of everything orbiting the Earth. What I also said, and people were nitpicking this, I said it doesn't work with the Tychonian system. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, I talk to flat earthers a lot, and you tell them you cannot map the night sky assuming a flat Earth geometry, like with a dome. It's just literally impossible. And they say that no, it works as long as you just say that it has 1,000 untenable assumptions. So you can see phases of Venus in a Tychonian hybrid model, but that doesn't make the model actually good or anything. So that's why I said it doesn't work. Those Copernican and Galileo models, like I said, they're obviously not perfect. But the only point I was really trying to make is that the phases of Venus preclude the geocentric model. So if the way I put that wasn't clear, then I guess that's my mistake. The other thing, my blind spot here, which I should probably talk about, is that what's really hard to do is trying to forget that we know what we know today. So I guess in my mind, I was thinking I could go back in time and say that like literally just the phases of Venus would prove that the geocentric dogma like can't be true. You can make this very bizarre case that it can be true if the planets are also orbiting the sun while orbiting the Earth. But I was really just saying that claiming everything orbits the Earth can be disproved by the phases of Venus. Okay, the last one is the most confusing, and it takes the most time to go through. So, did Galileo declare that heliocentrism is a fact? I say no. Inspiring Philosophy says yes. Tony Christie, I'm pretty sure his position is that he did say yes. I actually can't tell with Tim because he said a few things to me on Twitter, but it actually, I don't fully know. I'll show you what I mean. I'll put up the little Twitter exchange that Tim and I had here. So he says that, according to what the Inquisition said in the sentencing, to produce the impression that, so he's saying I'm dumb because to him that paragraph or sentence or whatever specifically says that Galileo did declare it as a fact, but that is not the plain reading of that at all to me. So then I ask like for clarification, because now he says promoting. So I'm like, okay, promoting heliocentrism, because they do say that in the sentence, or declaring it as a fact. And he shares another paragraph that we're actually going to go over, but that really just says that the book is very persuasive, and that doesn't mean that he declared it as a fact either. And then Tim just says that Galileo disobeyed his orders to talk about it in any terms, so now we're not talking about whether or not he said it as a fact. We're just talking about whether or not he said it at all. So I don't know Tim's actual position. My position is that I don't think there's enough of a justification to claim that he did. I'll tell you why I think that. So here's how I came up with trying to figure this out. Galileo writes a fictional book. One character says why they think the Earth goes around the sun. The other says the opposite. And the narrative was always that this was Galileo's way of talking about it without going too far, right? However, as we've discussed, the church said, do not discuss it on any terms or defend it in any way. So, but the question isn't, did Galileo flirt with the idea of it? It's, did he say that it's true? So instead of trying to assume Galileo's intent for writing the book, I went to the Inquisition to see what their sentence said. I'll put up the screenshot from the book that has the transcript of part of his sentencing that I've been using. You can pause and read this. It's really confusing because of the awkward language. It's centuries old. It's translated from a different language, but I actually don't find it all that hard to interpret. The church says explicitly that although you write that it is undecided, that is equally wrong to declaring it a fact because Scripture has finally determined it to be false. Well, what they're really saying is Scripture has determined that the earth does not move and that the sun does move. More specifically, that's what that means. So I didn't want to just take my word for it, so I used a language model to translate what that paragraph says into modern English. This is the best I could do. A language model doesn't have any opinions, and they're actually extraordinarily good at this kind of thing. So here is I have it right here. Let me pull this up. This is the entire paragraph translated into modern English. The only thing I took out was the name of the book because it just takes up space. I'm going to start reading kind of toward the end here. Although you try, through complex wording, to make it seem like you haven't fully decided on the matter and are just presenting it as a possibility, this is still a serious error. An idea that has already been declared completely against the Bible cannot be considered probable in any way. So this agrees with me, which is why I said what I said, but I can actually explain a lot more. Just after the church says he claims to have left the opinion undecided and probable, not a fact, just probable, they then say it is equally a very grave error. But equal to what? Well, they actually tell us next. Equal to saying Scripture is wrong. It says right there, it can't be probable if Scripture has finally determined otherwise. It's not stated here, but it's stated earlier that the official dogma is that Earth does not move. So this is the biggest problem I have with the counter-argument, because you cannot make sense of what this says by declaring that the Inquisition is saying declaring the Earth moves is true is an equal error to saying that the Earth moves. They would be saying the exact same thing twice if that was the case. I do not find that even remotely tenable. There's a slightly tangential thing here, but I think it's still important and relevant. And it's the church's firm and absolute stance of the dogma of a motionless Earth. I have been catching a huge amount of flack for saying it wouldn't have mattered in Galileo's time if he had used elliptical orbits or known the inverse square law. Now, why do I say that? I say that because of what the church says here. Can in no way be probable, which has been already declared and finally determined contrary to the Scripture. They're saying maybe isn't an option here. There were people like Bellarmine, but who was dead by this point, who said, given new evidence, we would reinterpret Scripture, but that is not what this says. This says no consideration can be even considered to be probable because Scripture has finally determined. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills stating this part of it constantly because I've had to state this part over and over again. I keep getting told that's not what it says. I don't see any other plain sense reading of this, that is exactly what it says. The dogma is finally determined. There just isn't room for reinterpretation here. The only thing, your only option would be to claim that the church went to these like outlandish lengths and wrote all of this in so many words to sound so definitive only to not really mean it. Moving on with, did the Inquisition say that Galileo explicitly said that heliocentrism is true? In the next paragraph, I'll put it up here for you, but I'll read the modern English translation for that second half. You admitted that parts of the book were written in a way that could make readers think the arguments in favor of the false idea were stronger than they really were, making them harder to refute. You excused this by saying that the error wasn't intentional, but happened because the book was written as a dialogue and due to your natural tendency to take pride in showing off your cleverness, even when coming up with convincing arguments for false ideas. This is what that Twitter back and forth was about. They're only saying you argued a position in a way that was favorable for one side. I just don't see the explicit declaration. So what's going on here? I'm pretty sure I'm not an idiot. I'm pretty sure I don't see anywhere where the Inquisition has said Galileo did proclaim it as a fact. They said he claims it's undecided, probable, and that it's written in a way that the heliocentrism argument is more persuasive. The only argument I can imagine is you have to assume, because they never said it, that the Inquisition can read his mind despite what his words were. I wouldn't put it past them, but that's not what I'm reading here. So I'm not convinced that he declared it as a fact, nor that they specifically accused him of it. But there's this one thing, though, and that's Galileo's abjuration. Now, the problem is that Galileo didn't write his own abjuration. So it's not an actual confession. He just didn't really have any choice. He had to read it, and they wrote it for him. But in it, he says, that is to say that I held and believed that the sun is the center of the world and is immovable, and that the earth is not the center and movable. But given all the other context, this is just kind of a mess. To me, the best that does is the Inquisition is claiming they can read his mind. And so they're telling him what to confess. But anyways, the most important thing with regard to this goes back to what I got wrong. He wasn't charged for heresy. He was judged vehemently suspicious of heresy. Now, what's the heretical thing in question? The dogma of earth not moving. And if he was not charged with heresy, then that means that he did not explicitly declare that the earth moves. Can anyone tell me what I'm missing here? Because how could he not have been convicted of heresy if he did explicitly express a heretical view? Isn't that the most slam dunk case in the Inquisition's history? That contradiction right there is, I have the biggest overall problem with that. And that's why this thing about whether or not he said it, I'm completely unconvinced. And that the Inquisition's own words that was always the strongest thing until I let Tim convince me that he wasn't actually charged with heresy. And now I'm very much a regular person. It's humiliating and it sucks and it almost makes me angry to be wrong. But I like learning more than I hate being wrong. My attitude about this entire thing is, even if these people go on and they make YouTube videos about me and the whole world thinks I'm an idiot, I don't care. I learned new things because of all this, and I just don't care what randos on the internet think. And if I hadn't pursued all of this the way I did, then I wouldn't have run into these things that I can now correct myself on, which is really just he didn't have permission to talk about it, hypothetically, from Bellarmine. I always knew that the Inquisition said he didn't have any permission to discuss it at all. and the vehement suspicion of heresy thing, which I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that means. I guess we'll see what happens. I'm ready to be done with the whole thing, so I don't plan on giving it any more energy or attention, but you never know.